Hello and welcome to the Weltall podcast, where we are doomed to praise life's every move despite knowing better. I'm your host, Singer of Whiteline, and as always, I'm happy to have Zach on the line.
Hi, hello, yes.
Hey, so how's it going?
Fine. Well, not a lot going on with. Well, I can't say that there isn't a lot going on with Dies Irae lately because there is. We'll
Yeah,
get into
it's
that.
just that
But
this episode took us 2 weeks to record because at first we didn't really have anything to discuss. We asked for some questions and we did listen to you and we will answer them in this episode. But it's just that we were not really in any rush to record it, and then Light dropped another bomb on us, and we figured that we might as well wait until everyone can check it out outside of the kind of awful stream quality. And
yeah, actually, the stream came out like just as we were about to record, and I figured that we may as well wait until they drop the news a few days later to record.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Even though in this fan base the news spread kind of fast, it still is a good idea to discuss something when everyone has access to it and can just, like, I don't know, click the link to the official website and see it for themselves.
yeah, and well, in general, I think it's fine if we don't record every week. We can
Yeah,
take
yeah. It's not like we don't have anything else to do.
yeah, we're both busy people in a way.
Mm, but still, it's fine to discuss stuff like once every 2 weeks or. Uh,
Whenever there's anything to discuss,
yeah,
yeah.
basically. Anyway, so speaking of things to discuss, we actually have four separate topics today. Uh, besides your questions. And the first one is going to be the official websites of this related merchandise. So the first one is the website for the anime's official soundtrack, which is already open, and you can check it out in the video description. And it actually has some music samples and the full track list. In fact, the soundtrack is so big this time that it takes 3 separate CDs. And the website has some samples for every CD. And it mostly consists of remixes from the visual novel, but it actually has some new tracks that we can't actually listen to because they're pretty low down the track list. But we can already see the blood refrain that Mari sings along with the crowd, and some other uh, weird names like what was it? Kraft durch Freude, and so on. But anyways, I do think that the samples that we do have are pretty good, and they do serve as a good example of Sensei's progress over these 10 years. Because
And
hmm?
pardon me for
Yeah,
cutting
yeah,
in,
sure.
but if there's one thing that's agreed upon in general, even among people who didn't enjoy the anime as much, and people who don't even know DS that well and went into the anime with no knowledge, is that the soundtrack is by far one of the anime's more redeeming
Yes,
qualities.
yes, we have already discussed it and said that even if you didn't like the anime itself, you could still support the part that you did like by ordering the soundtrack, for example. What really jumped at me in the sample tracks is that we can basically listen to the slice of life tracks, which were actually pretty damn bland in the visual novel, but this time you can actually tell them apart because they are now pretty different in style, and well, it basically reminds me of your description of the Senshin Kan soundtrack, that you actually can remember each of these tracks now.
Yeah. In general, I think like even from the anime, I think it was Mein Kampf, the track Mein Kampf,
Yeah,
which is like one of the Nichijou tracks, and it was it was like you said, it was okay. It was a little forgettable
yeah, basically.
in the visual novel, but in the anime they kind of added like a new kind of like a chord to it, like it's like a guitar there. Which kind of made it a lot more pleasant to the ear.
Yeah,
And I think it's so like, well, in general, I think like the guitar is Yuno's preferred instrument. I'm guessing, because
yeah.
he
I do assume that he doesn't really play all the instruments,
no,
but
of
he
course he
should
doesn't.
play the guitar, like he played Fanatiker a while
Exactly.
ago.
Exactly, that's what I was referring
Yeah,
to.
yeah,
So I think his preferred instrument is probably the guitar, and I'm also saying this based off of other tracks like Hajin's battle track in Kachuri Kamikagura has a very prominent electric guitar.
yes,
So I'm guessing, and some other tracks in Senshinkan as well. So I'm guessing that the guitar is one of his more preferred instruments, and having it kind of be a more calm rendition of the slice of life track for Diaz is it added a lot. It certainly made it
yeah,
stand
yeah.
out.
Right. And another note I would like to say here is that a while ago, there were quite a few live concerts of Yunyan, and she actually performed the 2017 version of Einsatz, which was kinda a head scratcher because we didn't really hear it anywhere, even in the anime.
Yeah.
And on the soundtrack we do have Einsatz, but it's an instrumental track, which we also heard back in the first anime promo video.
Mm-hmm.
And so I am not actually sure this is all there is to it. So we might actually get another, uh,
Single from
yeah,
you,
yeah,
even.
like a single or uh, putting this track on one of her new albums. Like I think Senshin Kan's Vita opening was put on one of her albums like this. So
Yeah, and it also ended up kind of appearing in Bensenjin. The instrumental version was actually
oh,
one of the battle tracks in Bensenjin. I think it was released actually as a single along with either Bensenjin's opening or Senshinkan's opening. I think it was released. It might have been released like in two different singles as well.
yeah,
But
yeah. I
there's
do.
also
Hmm?
there's also the other Gregorius remix, the GX something T. I don't remember, but
Uh-huh.
there's another like Gregorius remix that also got released in one of her albums.
Oh, I
Not
see.
not specifically a Dies Irae album, but just a compilation
Yeah, yeah.
of a
Okay,
compilation album. Yeah, and that had one of the Dies Irae remixes as well.
okay.
The Gregorius remixes.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, basically, even if uh, you do buy the soundtrack, there might be something you still have to buy down the line because that just means more money in Light's pockets.
Record record
Anyways,
companies are bitches. Yeah,
huh? Huh?
record companies are bitches.
Yes. Anyway, speaking of money in Light's pockets, we also have the official website for the Switch version open right now. Uh, it actually opened a while ago, and we already discussed the main visual and such, but it got a pretty major update not too long ago, and unfortunately it doesn't really have anything new to it. Like, it has everything you expect to see on a game's website. You have the story page, you have the character page, but it doesn't say anything new that we didn't know from other versions of the game. Like, I would actually expect to hear the new opening at some point. I would expect at least a page for Mifra on the character list or something like that. But
Well, I'm assuming that Mifra doesn't like appear in the main story, so they
yes,
wouldn't.
but they do have the character profiles for other side story characters like Sieglind, Alfred, and so on. So I kind of thought, oh, well, now is a good time to say something about her, especially because you don't really have to say anything new. You can just copy and paste the bio from the Pantheon website, but they didn't even do that. So yeah, there's nothing really much to talk about here, except for it might not be the last update. We might still get something more, like the special page is especially barren right now. That was not intended, by the way. So we only have the same page of the Pantheon side story, which doesn't tell us anything new. But yeah, they're still working on it, and I assume we will have more news on it well, around the end of August.
That said, the site is pretty like even if it doesn't introduce anything new, it is it does have some nice work
Yeah,
put
yeah,
into it. Like the stage page is actually really nice. It's really cute.
yes, it is.
You have the characters like discussing and cracking jokes at each
Yeah, you
other.
also have the glossary
The glossary
page.
page, yeah,
Yeah,
which is interesting in and of itself. Um, oh yeah, like for a pretty, but it's for an update, it's pretty nice. Um,
it's just that I'm pretty sure we have already had all these pages on like Act's
yeah,
Formula
yeah,
website, so they
yeah,
didn't
yeah.
really write it down from scratch.
Well, yeah, some of the stuff they definitely brought from other places, but some of it is new and it's rearranged. It's
Yeah,
nice.
either way, people have kinda forgotten about all those websites because those versions aren't really.
They
Uh,
haven't been relevant for
yeah, yeah, exactly. And
for years.
bringing it all back just makes sense.
Yep.
And what else is there? Well, the graphic definition is HD, like the current PC version, so there
It
isn't
makes
much.
sense. It's supposed to be on television.
Yeah, yeah, but some companies don't really think about that. So
I don't know. I think anything that's released on console has is usually like made in high definition, or at
yeah,
least in widescreen. So
yeah,
for
yeah, basically. All right, so well, that's it for the Switch website. Another piece of news that we got yesterday, basically, that G-Yusuke is publishing yet another doujin of his on the coming Comiket. So he actually had a few doujins published already, along with his good friend Yunagi, and it's basically a combination of a sketchbook, an art book, and an original story of his own. And
yeah.
it basically tells the story of Lotus, Anna, and Mikhail in the world of Mari in 1940s. Like it's nothing really special. It just has some nice interactions between characters we know and love. It actually has some decent action, especially starting from the last issue where uh, Lotus actually starts fighting with Schreiber and Wilhelm. And in this new issue, we are expected to see some punches thrown around.
Mucky
So
punches.
yes, well, I'm not sure it's Maki
Well,
punches at this
it's more.
point.
Yeah, it won't be exactly Maki. It'll effectively be Maki punches,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. It
But
certainly seems like he didn't lose anything since the fourth heaven.
yeah, yeah. But yes, it's. I could hear your screaming all the way from Russia. Your fangirl squealing all the way from Russia. So it's.
I wouldn't call it fangirl squealing, but okay. Anyway, it's actually not that easy to buy these, unfortunately. But if you do find them in on sale, then do make sure to buy them and thank G for his.
They do go up on like secondhand sites
Yeah,
sometime.
yeah. It's just that it's not as handy as just buying it
No, of course,
on
but
the spot.
the prices are actually usually on par with the actual prices of the dojins. Of course, you have to pay for shipping, so that
Yeah, yeah. That's the point,
that
really.
spoils everything. But other than that, like it's possible to get them if you're willing. Um,
This
I'll
reminds me
also
that I didn't actually buy any of these when I was in Japan this year.
I have one, but I'm going to Japan in September,
Yes.
so I'll definitely look. I'll definitely look for those. If I find it, I may very well buy it. But yes,
Yeah, and well, this goes without saying, really, but the dojins are not canon, so you should not treat them
yeah,
as.
Masuda isn't writing them. It's basically like fan service, written by G. You can also see by the rather how cute and favorably treated Anna is in these things, which I'm not sure Masuda would ever do that. Um,
Well, I don't know.
well, it is.
Who is his favorite heroine again?
Masuda's, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that G's favorite heroine is Rusalka. Well, she's not a heroine, but his favorite girl is Rusalka.
Yes.
Which isn't necessarily true for Masuda. Masuda himself is like, how is she this popular? It makes no sense.
Well, he
So,
asked the same about Spinus, so I won't trust his tastes that much, really.
what?
He wonders about Spinus' popularity, so I'm like, how can you
Okay,
not see
yeah,
it?
yes. But yeah, but I mean, that's not to say that Rusalka get treated that badly. All in
No,
all, in
no,
the
she's not.
series. Not at all. She actually gets one of the better endings out
Yeah,
of all the characters. But but I think like making her this adorable is something that is more like Chiyusuke to do than Masada.
yeah. The point is that he's as much of a fan of this as we are, so of course he would draw some of his favorite characters in his spare time and maybe make some quick buck out of it.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah,
Everyone else is doing it.
right. And a bit more effort was put by him into our main news of the month, I assume, is that the Pantheon website got updated once again, which is breaking a new record for the Pantheon website because it only took like 1 month to do it this time. Uh, and actually, it added way more than everyone assumed because most people thought that since we only had one throne revealed to us in July, it would take like 7 more months to actually reveal the rest, or even 7 more years. But contrary to everyone's expectations, we actually got 3 more thrones this time, which actually bodes pretty well for us because, well, now
There's only one more
yeah,
lump.
yeah. Basically, you expect that there is only one more update before we get all the 7 thrones, and then we get the Switch version, which reveals even more to us. Like, I hope that everyone will get a speaking part in it, and that means we are going to get the voice actors, we are going to get the gameplay demo somewhere around that time, and
Yeah.
then we are going full speed towards the Pantheon's release, which is pretty exciting. And I actually still stand by my opinion that we might actually see it this year.
Yeah, it's the fact that there's a possibility that by August the world page will be by the end of August the world page will be filled up, and who knows, they might add like more pages going forward.
Yeah.
Does kind of seem like it's like a winter release is possible.
Yeah, even if it's not this year, we might actually get it around like February or March of 2019,
Hopefully.
which is pretty good, but in that it's all just our guess. Unfortunately, this is the only thing that got updated on the website. We still don't have the logos for Android or Apple or Super Apply.
Or anything.
We still don't have any release window noted. But still, uh, it's free thrones. It's free great GUSK illustrations, which we might as well discuss now. As you might remember, we already had Ahura Mazda on the website. We already discussed it to some extent when the website itself got updated. But this time we got fronts from second to fourth. We actually got two pictures for each one. Well, it's not actually different pictures, like we have a zoom on the god itself and a panned look of their throne. Actually, it means that Mithra is the only one we haven't seen the throne of in good quality. So I hope Masada will upload it at some point. Anyway, so we will start with the second throne, Paradise Lost, which is hella edgy. As
Yes,
you would expect.
everybody were like, "Oh God, he's hot."
Yes, that
Oh
too.
no.
Like
uh,
when people saw the main visual on the website, they were like, "Oh, hey, it's Spin with a sword." But now people are like, oh man, he's
yeah.
good."
Yes, he's looking smooth,
Yes, exactly.
looking savvy.
And actually, his suit reminds me of one of Paradise Lost characters now. So,
Of
uh,
the
of the Aslan,
yeah, the leader of the
of the Unlicht Viper.
yeah,
So
of the unlimited
there
Life.
is this mafia group in Sodom which basically controls everything in the city. Its leaders are three in number, and they are kind of in this stalemate between each other. Like no one out of them has the upper hand, and that is why they can actually work together.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a three color struggle. Anyway,
Not
so
really, but yeah.
so
Except because they're not interesting.
yes, well, they have some charm to them, but it's not to the extent actual three demons of Paradise
Yeah.
Lost have.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
they have this uh, image to them that follows the in-world mythology, which mentions the likes of Beelzebub, Belial, and Astaroth. So they are kind of like, oh well, we are the main honchos of the city, so we might as well be these awesome demons. And Aslan is the Belial of the three, and I I haven't actually gotten to him fighting or anything. I know that the Beelzebub of the three has some special powers, so I assume the rest have
They
as
all
well.
Yeah, they all have kind of special powers, but
They're nowhere
in
near as
they're
overpowered
nowhere.
as actual demons.
Yeah, I feel like they're mostly there to like kind of mechanically move the plot along.
Yeah, yeah, you
Uh,
have Noah working on them, you have Judas working on them to
they
some
basically
extent.
they like chase they like end up putting a bounty on Ryle. They're like you know they kind of control drug supply. You have the
Yeah,
drug
they
supply in the
control the
city.
gate.
They control the gate. Yeah, so they kind of have a mechanical role, but they're like extremely inconsequential as villains, I'd say, and they all end up getting off rather unceremoniously
Yeah,
by
I'd
the end of
compare
it.
them to like uh, one of the background villains from Ikabei, who gets killed like in the very
No,
end.
They're not even that substantial. The background villain in Ikabe is actually very. Oh, the one in
Yeah, yeah,
the.
that background villain.
Oh, okay, yeah. They're a little more substantial than he is, but I guess they're like about as substantial as like the double Adler are in the.
Yeah, yeah, I suppose that makes sense.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. They do have influence on the story, but they're like nowhere near as interesting and they're nowhere near as significant as like anything revolving around Satanael.
Yeah, so
Uh,
basically, would you say that Muzan might actually be among them?
no.
No, okay. There we go. Let's talk about his throne for a bit, shall we? It has one, two, three, four, five, six, seven great circles, which people uh, justifiably consider to be reference to Sephiroth,
Yeah, it's
because
probably only seven of them are visible, and a few are probably hidden behind the front or something. Um,
yeah, I suppose so. Although I wouldn't be surprised if it's because like two of the Sephiroths are not complete yet or something like that. But why are there so many of them in that case? Oh, anyway, yeah. Uh, it's basically a reference to the Sephiroth. And what exactly does it mean in Paradise Lost story?
well, there is a lot of like Satanael basically concocts a theory way before the beginning of the story. The ley lines of the world are kind of related to the Sephiroth, and you can kind of use the ley lines to like trace back the ley lines to like siphon power
Mm-hmm.
from the creator, and like he uses that to fuel his superpowers and summon the assorted angels and assorted fallen angels and demons.
So he kinda takes access to the throne itself. Is
In
that?
a way, it could be seen as that, yes, and it makes sense if you look forward. Like, it's obvious that Masuda probably didn't plan that far, but you can kind of see this, for example, in Kajiri Kamui Kagura, where the main characters actually drop power from the throne god. They drop power from Hajun.
Yes.
Like, so drawing power from the throne gods is an entirely like possible uh, tactic in Shinzaverse.
Yes.
So it can be seen as that. He also has a thing where he uses the reverse, where he uses the cliff off, which is like the reverse
Yeah, yeah.
Sephiroth. He also has a part where he does that in one of the side stories as well. Um, but yes, there's also of course the reference to the ley lines, which is interesting because ley lines are actually an Eastern idea, as far as
Yes,
I.
and it's actually mentioned in the Dies Irae because it is because of these ley lines that Swahara was built where it is. So
Yes,
it required these ley lines to actually proceed with the ritual of the transmutation of gold.
yes, and also Trifa in the beginning of the story travels through ley lines from the other side of the planet to reach Suwahara. To reach Japan, to be
I
exact.
actually missed that.
Yeah,
Okay.
right at the beginning, at the scene where Kay is bowing
Yeah,
down before
yeah, I
at the end of the
suppose, yeah.
prologue. So yeah, she traveled using the ley lines.
Oh,
Uh,
I suppose you just don't know enough to understand it at that point.
yeah, probably. It's like a short mention, and nothing makes sense. So I can see people forgetting that.
And also, we still have Rusalka and Wilhelm and the like still traveling the world properly, like actual humans.
In a car driven
Yeah, yeah,
by
in a car, on a
Spain.
plane, and so
Yep.
on. Besides the Sephiroth, we also have the quite obvious sword motif
Yes.
all over the throne. Uh,
Yes.
it is in and of itself one huge sword. We have Mulan's sword, which we have already discussed to some extent before, but it still looks like a huge cross and has some more uh, blink to
Well,
it, which
yeah,
doesn't really mean anything.
we kind of got a better look at like the golden like the golden finish it has on
Yeah,
it,
yeah, yeah.
which
But
is
it
pretty cool.
doesn't seem to mean anything at this point.
Well, yeah, unless we get a better look at it, we might not be able to.
Yeah.
I doubt it doesn't mean anything.
Well, I suppose, yeah.
But
Uh,
we'll see, I
it's
guess.
Mazda we're talking about here, so. And we also actually have even more swords hovering around Muzan. They are mostly of different shapes, but the question that comes to mind is why are all of them pointing toward him? Shouldn't it be the other way around if he is the god in charge and he like uh, swings down the sword of justice on the whoever it is who lives in his world? Like
Yeah.
uh, the swords are basically the main mystery of his at this point, I would say. There have been quite a few theories made on Twitter. One of them says that the swords are basically embodiments of the taboos from back from the Ahura Mazda, because basically Muzan ascended to the throne because he was tired of all the taboos, which couldn't let him do what he wants and put him and his men at a disadvantage before the forces of evil. And so these swords might be this uh, well, mm, incarnation of that thought, because as we already know from Mithra's story, even if you know something is not correct, you still kinda have it on the background of your mind. Like you still have to abide to the law you were born under, and that is why kinda. Even if Muzan ascended to the throne and emanated his own law, he might still be restricted by the laws of the previous god.
Um. Yes, I suppose you could. That's one possible. I think the theory I prefer more is that the swords are holding him in place, and that kind of
Yeah,
brings the
yeah.
thought that kind of brought the thought that um m- that Muzan might have not wanted to take over the throne. He might have just wanted to remove Mithra from it, and he
Oh, so
doesn't
you have
actually.
like the Hajin scenario, right?
Kind of, yes. And he basically sits on the throne, kind of unwillingly, and well, I don't know if their expressions are anything to go by, but he doesn't seem particularly pleased up there, while Mercurius is terribly smug.
Well, it's
Uh-huh.
hard to read his expression really. Like he does seem content to some extent.
I don't know if he seems convinced. He actually seems kind of. He looks like he's frowning to me, but.
We'll see. We'll see, I guess. And another point is that the number of swords is there are like 17, I think. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 13. No, it's like 18, I think. So anyway, that might actually be symbolic as well, but numerology is one of the most vague mystical sciences out there, so you can give any sort of meaning to it if you want to.
Yeah.
Anyway, along with the visual, we also got a small blurb of his rule, which doesn't really tell us anything new, but still we did translate it. And it also gives us his very first quote we have. Like, just like with Mifra, we not only have the description of his wall, but also his way of describing it.
It's credo in a way.
Yeah, basically. So I can already assume that Hajun will have Metsujin Miso here, and Mari will have I will embrace all and everything. And in Muzan's case, Muzan's version of Metsujin Miso is let me look it up. I didn't actually paste it in the notes, so
yeah, I've got it. I remember that I translated it back in the 31st.
We also had Steiner reposting it on his Twitter. So, live within the embrace of crime and punishment. That is what it means to be human, basically.
Yes.
So, it actually brings up the point that Paradise Lost, which is again Muzan's throne, it's the remorseless paradise of the fallen. And it actually is a cycle of sorts, because you have different civilizations growing, then crashing down, and then new civilizations growing out of them. So it's kind of like an endless cycle of the fourth heaven, except, well, people still remember all of it and can learn some lessons out of it. And that's basically Muzan's point here, is that sure, you can do whatever you want, but don't blame me if someone actually happens to you because of it. And, besides that, we also have a short description of his world, which we did translate for this show. So, it's Remorseless Paradise of the Fallen, Paradise Lost. The god's name is the Remorseless, the second god who has defeated the truth and took over the throne. According to his law, every living being is born with a primordial aspect called the original sin. Therefore, the unrestrained desires swell to enormous proportions, and the cultural advancements lead to even greater crimes in the real age of chaos. This is the paradise of evil feasting on evil. The jungle of sinners who only abide to the rule of force is remorseless and unforgiving, as with no shame there is no penance. So, again, it's not really anything new here, but it's reinforces that it's still the same Paradise Lost we know from the actual work. And that's certainly something, because some worlds did change after since then. Right.
Yep.
So, anything else to say here?
It's kind of worth mentioning that despite it being as described like a paradise of evil feasting on evil, that's not to say that everybody were evil to the same extent. Like we said, and it's actually one of the primary quotes for Paradise Lost, the game, is that everyone is born with some measure of the original sin. Some people have extremely large amounts of it, which is a lot of the main cast are
Yes,
actually
yes.
have like an
Most
extremely
people are
large amount.
Sodom, basically.
No, actually, it's not so. It's not exactly like that. Some people, everyone have it, but some people have almost their entire soul infected by original sin. For example, like Satanael, as it turns out, is actually has an incredibly large amount of original sin within him, specifically the sin of, I believe it's of pride.
That makes
Uh,
sense.
I believe, I don't recall. I think it's of
Well,
pride.
I mean, pride is believed to
Lucifer,
be the
Lucifer.
main sin. Yeah, yeah.
And it's associated with Lucifer.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
So I think I need to read that part of the novel again, but I believe it's pride. Um, Now the thing is though, when you see like Zohar's society like ages before it fell, like before it fell, not ages before it fell, ages before the beginning of the story, it's actually like built as a sort of utopia in the guise of a dystopia. Excuse me, a dystopia in the guise of a utopia.
Mm-hmm.
Pardon, where you have basically like 10 affluent sections to the city, which is like based around the Sephiroth, and four affluent and four sections that are like where the damned and the cursed and the sinful people reside. Now, the implication is that the segregation as to who's sinful and who's worthy of living in the good parts of the city is actually fairly arbitrary and controlled by like a senate
Mm-hmm.
that controls the city. So it's like, and they're like supposedly close to God, and they have a kind of a religious authority to
Oh yeah,
everything.
yeah. We know how that usually goes.
Yes, exactly. So it's like implied. So it's actually really close to like real life, which is, by the way, one of the first things noted in the Shinza Meguri about Muzan's law, that it actually brought humanity back to a state that's very similar to how it was before the throne was made.
Yes.
So, like you said, we're familiar with the idea of a religion basically mind washing everyone, but it's like it's implied that like the sinfulness of it all was a little more subtle, shall we say? It was there. It was more in the form of like corruption and more like of an underlying kind of behavior, kind of like in Kajiri Kamui Kagura, where before everything starts, everyone are egotistical, but there is a society going on. People do kind of coexist.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like a little more under the. It's like a current running under the surface as opposed to like a big sort of behavior that everyone is doing because
Yeah, it's nowhere
if
near close Metsujin Miso, basically.
yeah, because if you look at it, because I'm sure that you might have thought of this while you were reading Paradise Lost, but I personally did. How does this city even exist to any significant amount of time? I mean, considering how many people die every day, so how many people kill each other every day,
Yeah.
how is this city even functioning? So, yeah, that's
Well, we
kind
have
of
people like Carmine, we have people like Ennis,
yes,
who.
but I think it's like this is speculation, but I think it's like there might be a bit of maybe a bit of Buddhistic influence here, where there's like in Buddhism there's like cosmic eras, and each cosmic era has several phases to it, and usually when a cosmic era is approaching its end, it's usually that's usually when people start like forgetting the Buddha, forgetting the right path,
Yeah,
begin
yeah, yeah.
sinning more and more, and then basically like I believe it's Shiva descends, burns all of creation to the ground, and recreates the cosmos, and a new cycle begins. I think it's probably like this, like the incredible amount of dissidence and crime in Sodom in Paradise Lost is indicative probably of the fact that it's nearing a transition period.
The Mappo age, I
The
believe.
Mapo, yes, exactly, Mapo. That's
And
the
this
name in
is yet
Japanese.
another way Paradise Lost reminds me of Ninja Slayer.
Okay.
Yeah, because in Ninja Slayer this Mapo theme is really pronounced because you have Buddha, you have all these quirky Japanese traits to it, so yeah. Uh, anyway, so I suppose I should also know that the Sephiroth is apparently a big deal in Pantheon proper, so there is bound to be some sort of connection to Paradise Lost
Yes.
on the grand scheme of things. Anyway, so let's move on to the third heaven,
You
which is
forgot the quote. Did you mention? Oh yeah, you did mention the quote. Yes.
yeah, yeah,
Pardon.
yeah. It's just that I translated it myself on the spot. Anyway,
Okay.
so we move on to the third heaven, Zoar, or the imperfect heaven of the morning star, and his throne. The first impression it gives on off is that there is not really much space here. It really feels like a prison. Yeah, basically.
I actually what kind of caught my eye is like the pattern that's like above the throne in the panned out
Mm.
version. It looks like wings to me.
Yeah, I think it does look
It's
like wings.
supposed, yeah. I think it's supposed to signify wings, and to that extent, like the crystals that are like below the throne and beside it, also kind of feel like they're supposed to give like a wing, like a feather, like.
Yeah, yeah, I can see
Uh,
that.
um. Yes.
Speaking of
Now,
wings, we have our uh, old familiar Satanel sitting on the throne, but he actually doesn't have any wings of his own here, which is
yes.
how we are used to seeing him, but apparently he has them both on the main visual of Pantheon and in the anime. So
Yes.
uh, it kind of feels like his wings are up there on the throne, and he's like, well, if I am going to stand up, I'll put them on, but right now I don't have to.
It's also possible that you retracted them. Like the angel characters actually have retracted.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
angel characters don't always walk around with their wings in Paradise Lost, so it's entirely possible he retracted them.
yeah. We have like Real who does have wings, but she doesn't really uh, put them out
Unless
often.
she's like using her angel abilities.
Yeah, she can fly. She can again gain access to the throne to some extent, and so
She can
on.
be cute.
Well, she always is.
Yes, she's a
Well,
literal
most of the
angel.
time, okay. Uh,
Majitenshi.
yes. Anyway, so Satanael's actually, well, I don't know if it's on purpose or just accidental, but he feels a bit more bulky to me here. Like he has a bit more of an
It's
impression to him.
I think it's kind of because he's sitting and like his cloak suit is like spread like this that it looks like
Yeah,
it.
I suppose.
Also, you gotta respect Muzan's man spreading.
I suppose.
Um, but yes. So also another point that we've already mentioned on Twitter is that all the crystals around Muzan are apparently salt crystals.
Yes, yes, of course, because his idea of purifying the world is covering it in salt, and it all goes back to the
Biblical.
biblical, pardon me, plot of the punishment of Sodom, and so on and so forth. And
Yes.
actually, his quote mentions it as well. Satanel's version of Mitsujin Meso is be dyed in white, be dyed in white, let the pure white of salt wash over you. So yeah, he's sitting on a literal throne of salt, and like I said already, a lot of space around him is filled with salt crystals. If you compare his throne to the other three we have so far, it like basically feels like he's underground, really,
Yeah.
where everything is salt. But either way, we will have enough time to have all the salt jokes when Pantheon actually comes out. But for now, we also have two statues behind him. We have two angelic warriors who wield a sword and a shield. Uh, as we have mentioned, Paradise Lost does have angels of different shapes and sizes, really, because Satanael's quest for the Sinless Man was pretty long and fruitful, actually. How similar would you say are these angels to the ones we saw in Paradise Lost? Like, there
Not.
are some angels who look like giants, so to say, all bulky and such.
Yeah, those angels are actually always looked very mechanical to me, which is which is fitting.
Yeah, because
Uh,
angels in the Bible itself are not really humans with wings most of the time. Like, if you play the Shin Megami Tensei series, you have a good idea of how monstrous they can be.
yeah, but actually, it depends on the version. Like a lot of the time, angels actually just take on the shape of human beings
Yeah, yeah.
because they're messengers. Most of the time, they don't actually, they don't do much. Like the Binding of Isaac, the angel this basically appears like a man, as far as we can tell. There was also Moses, I think, wrestling the angel, who appeared like a human being. So they don't. So like in the Old Testament itself, I don't know much about how the angels appear in the New Testament because I'm not as savvy about the New Testament. But in the Old
That's okay.
Testament, at least, the angels are mostly usually take on the shape of human beings for the sake of delivering God's messages. But yeah, like you said, we did see there is like a bit of imagery of Sodom's first fall, and in Paradise Lost, and we did see like angels flying around destroying the city, which I guess you could kind of see it as like those guys behind there. The question is, I don't have a very good look at them right now, but it's
Yeah,
worth like.
mm, it's pretty weird because the actual images are on Masada's Twitter account, so even if you check the Pantheon website, you might not actually get
Yeah,
the
you actually only see it
So
in
we
the
will
background.
put it in the video description as well.
Yeah, but I think it's a little hard to tell if it actually refers to any specific angels. Actually,
Yeah, there are some orders of angels which we might guess as well. Like, you have the powers, the principalities, and so on.
yeah, but
Well, I
I don't
assume
know.
it's like powers or something.
Yeah, they're actually a little more armored. They actually seem to be like in like gold armor or something, which is not. I don't recall it being like that in Paradise Lost anyway.
Yeah, yeah, they
But
feel
we can
more
assume
like
it.
porcelain or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. So the main angels we see, which are archangels, are all have the appearance of beautiful young women.
Yes.
So it's it's
And
not
I would have
exactly.
actually assumed that they would be near his throne. Uh,
Well, it depends. Like I would assume, like Rill should definitely be.
yeah,
Excuse me,
yeah,
not Rill.
because most of
Ast.
them weren't actually perfect, so
Yes, but Ast should definitely be there. Astaroth should definitely be there, mostly because in some of the endings, Astaroth actually ascends to the throne with Satanael and apparently assists him in dethroning the god.
Oh,
Yes, it's actually something that happens in some of the endings. Actually, one of the points about Ast is that in the end she does also kind of prove herself to be kind of perfect the way Rill is. So it's entirely so. There's no reason that Rill would be there and Ast wouldn't. um,
well, there are two of them here, so who
it
knows?
could, yeah. Who knows? It could be. Actually, I don't know. Rill kind of. Well, you'll see once you finish
Okay,
Paradise
okay,
Lost.
yeah.
But in the end, I mean, I guess that the angels would make sense to appear in like characters once Paradise Lost story rolls about. Um, like they would probably be summonable characters or bosses or something like
Yeah, yeah,
that.
most probably.
Another point is if you look at like the feathers above his throne, there's actually a symbol in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
center there
Okay.
that I actually can't quite make out.
But it might be
But
something, yeah?
it might be something that's worth inspecting. But yes, it could also be something as simple as just a symbol of Sodom being stricken down. But we'll
Yeah,
see.
like we have some symbol without really any deeper meaning in the series, so it might as well be the same here, and oh, we can only speculate at this point, anyways.
Yes, we would definitely. I'm assuming that if this symbol is indeed relevant, we'll see more of it.
Oh,
Uh,
either way, it wasn't in Paradise Lost.
not to the extent that we know. No.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, that's
Okay,
about it.
so we also have a description of his throne, which goes as such. In perfect heaven of the morning star, Soar. The god's name is the Morning Star, the third god who has defeated the remorseless and took over the throne. According to his law, every living being is born with no primordial sin, purified to the core. A dystopian colony-like society that denies human personality in the name of the world devoid of evil or conflict. A prison of salt born of obsessive desire for purity and sterility. Such is the world of the Morning Star. So, as we have mentioned before, it doesn't really look like the Soar we saw in Paradise Lost, and it doesn't explain anything beyond that as well.
Yes, it's especially interesting because when you actually get a little glimpse of the world after Satana ascends, and it actually looks kind of utopic, and it doesn't feel like the characters don't have free will. It actually looks like kind of like a happily ever after
Yeah, yeah, basically.
along the lines
The
of like
marrying.
yes, exactly. Where pretty much everyone like gets their chance at happiness. It actually looks kind of utopic. Um, so again, whether that ending ends up being retconned or things just didn't end up the way that Satanael wanted. Maybe the throne took his wish to a logical
Or it
extreme,
just deteriorated over time.
or it deteriorated. Yes. Um, So yes, it's a little interesting because I feel like if you want to just look at the Zor that appears during the main story, that's actually pretty similar to this description, like a pure white society with no personality, all that.
Yeah,
Oh,
yes.
I've already described it in the past, but like the Zor that appears as the equivalent to Sodom in during the main story of Paradise Lost is actually very similar. Um, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah, and
It's,
this again goes back to my thought of the gods still being restricted by their vision of the world that they grew in. So it
yes,
might be something along those lines.
perhaps yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, I suppose that should do for our Satanel. and we can move on to a very familiar throne, which is Omega Ewigkeit, the Eternal Mercurial Recurrence. So, I suppose this man needs no introduction,
No.
but we can still discuss the design of his throne and the fact that he is sitting in exactly the same posture as on the LDO tapestry.
Tapestry. Yes.
So you might say that you have seen it somewhere.
Yes. You could say that it's you get some deja vu out of it.
Yep. Anyway, so we have already seen the throne in the anime, and it has some similarities, but it's still pretty different. I would say it's a bit more detailed, basically. Probably because G drew it,
Yes.
and he has no free time. And
No.
well, what else? We of course have the caduceus over Mercurius's head. It's not quite the two-headed snake we saw in the three-headed struggle ending, freeway struggle, or area ending in general. But it's still there. We also have some. We actually have a lot of gold over it. Like it looks mostly gold to me.
I don't know if it looks mostly gold. I think it's like there are like two wings to the throne, so you have a lot of silver and a lot of gold to it.
Yeah, basically.
So it's like I'd say it's almost 50-50. But yeah, as you said, there's a lot of presence of gold on his throne.
Yes, because how should we describe it? Well, they're good friends,
Yes.
as it always goes. And we also.
Or as Masada kind of described his throne as familiar from the anime, a universal class stalker, an occasional homo.
Yes. And the people over some bases are like, what? He's a homo? Really? Like,
What? No.
well, yeah. I wonder how you missed it. Anyway, so we also have some. I'm not sure how to describe it. Like at the very base of his throne, we have a bubble of sorts, which really looks like twilight or
Yeah, you
something
can
like
see
that.
you can see the twilight sky. It's implied. It looks like the singularity.
Yeah, basically.
Otherwise.
So it is implied at some point that if Reinhard and Ren go any deeper than this singularity, then they might actually break over to the throne itself and face Mercurius, which they do in their ending. But yeah, we actually see it here, and we basically see that Mercurius is, that Mercurius has a lot of connections to other gods of his age.
Yes.
Well, except for Ren, I guess. And even
Yes.
then, I suppose you can say that the smaller silver wings right around him are kinda like a symbol for Ren.
Yes. Another point actually is that there's like a red kind of space behind his throne
Yeah.
with like a light shining in it.
Yeah.
And what that means is we can only speculate. We don't know at the moment.
Yeah, it also reminds me that now that we can actually compare the thrones to each other, we can go back to Mithra's throne, and now that I think about it, she has this huge sphere around her throne, which I'm not really sure means anything. Oh, it probably does, but we don't really know what exactly. Well,
Yes.
it might just be the universal symbol of balance because the sphere usually denotes harmony and so on. And it might just be the symbol of her dualistic rule. Anyway, just as everyone else, Mercurius has his own description, which is a bit shorter than everything else, but it's still there. So his quote is, "Reveal to me the unknown," and the front description goes like, "Eternal mercurial recurrence, Omega Ewigkeit. The god's name is the Mercury, the fourth god who has defeated the morning star and took over the throne. According to his law, every living being is locked within an endless loop. The bearer of the new age of the divine throne, who has introduced the concept of the afterlife and expanded his realm across the entire multiverse by seizing the axis of time itself. This is the god who boasts the longest reign to date." It's worth noting that before Mercurius, the gods were basically concerned with good and evil, like what is good, what is not, and how the world should work around it. But Mercurius didn't really care about it. However, he did care about what happens after death, and that exact thought will be followed by his uh, con by the gods after him, basically. And Mari introduces the concept of reincarnation, which is basically still life after death. Hajun denies it altogether, and then the Amaterasu introduce it back and allow everyone to have any afterlife they want. But besides that, it is worth noting that basically it is implied that the first three gods ruled the same time axis. So it might be natural to think that the world resets after the new god takes over, but it is implied that it's actually the case only after Mercurius took over the throne. And before him the world didn't reset, and you just had a new law emanating across all of it. So yeah, Mercurius did rewrite a lot of different rules of the throne, and it is assumed that over the course of Pantheon these very rules are going to be rewritten once again. But that's not really anything that concerns Mercurius himself, and we have already talked about him in great detail, so I suppose we will end this update here.
Yes.
Unless you have anything else to say, of course.
No.
Yeah, alright, so as I said, we assume that the next three gods will be added at the end of August. We will have another live stream where they will show it to us for the first time. They were actually going to have some time dedicated to the anime project ending and giving their thanks to everyone involved, but they didn't really have enough time for it, so they might dedicate an entire episode to all of that in August and reveal some gods along the way. Anyway, that about does it for the news, and we can move on to answering your questions, which we did get a lot of, which is as always pretty good. And we will start with OP Defender's question. I'm kinda interested in the production history of Dies, considering its tumultuous releases. I'm not really sure we can talk an entire episode about it yet, because apparently Zach is going to read all those Sprach Zarathustra at some point.
Don't plan about it. Don't plan about it happening anytime soon. But it'll happen. It'll happen at some point, but not right now.
I mean, you did read Suinosaurus, so anything is possible.
Yep.
Anyway, so Dies Irae was announced in 2007. People knew at that point that it was going to be written by Masada, it will have G-Yusuke's artwork. They had some vague idea of the story. I'm not sure people have already known about Yonao's involvement, but considering that Paradise Lost was already a thing, they could have assumed that he's still on board along with Masada. Then in 2008, the first drama CD, Werewolf, comes out. It doesn't have a lot to say about the proper story of the game. Well, you already know about it from the side stories of the game. It was basically that exact same thing, but released well in advance of the actual game. And it actually had Shade and Darkness for the first time. So the first song we had was not actually performed by Yu and Yan. And then the release date happened. So basically, the first thing that people noticed is that the game doesn't take as much space as was described on the official website, which kinda raised some eyebrows. But then it turned out that the script is nowhere near as big as was announced. A lot of CGs are missing, and in fact, entire two routes are missing as well. So, Either Sprach Zarathustra only had the routes for Kasumi and Mari. Moreover, Masada himself only wrote the common route. The proper routes were written by 6 different scenario writers, which
Ouch.
basically never came back to the series. And you can make a guess how well that went. Like, I haven't read it myself, but I have heard some stories about it because basically it became a huge source of memes for the Eastern fan base. Like, you have people quoting random phrases mentioned by the commanders in the proper routes because they basically acted like idiots, all of them, Reinhardt included. Like, you have
Yeah, it's actually an interesting kind of case where the release of Elsa's Sparks Register is actually considered one of the worst releases in Arrogate history. Which is
people consider that the original release is the definitive one.
Yeah, but and it's interesting because 2 years later, the amended version came out, and it was actually considered one of the better games in the industry.
Yeah,
So it's actually
basically.
interesting how it went from one extreme to the other.
So, before I go on, like, we have Alder Sprach Zarathustra, which have retarded screaming Eleanor. We have Schreiber humming to himself while carrying Ellie and Shiro. We have Makina, who is basically this big dumb idiot who can only scream Zarathustra and stuff. And we have the iconic Ichigeki Da line.
Yes.
Ichigeki Da to. So, Ichigeki Da. So, you have this very long descriptions of stuff which should basically be obvious already. And so on. So, it was the literal day of wrath for the Eastern audience. So, because of that, Masada basically figured that okay, he has lost a lot of faith, so he has to recover all of it and never do anything as bad as this ever again.
Yes, never speak of it ever again.
Yeah, basically. And so in 2009, Dies Irae Aldersprach Zarathustra Die Wiederkunft comes out. It's still the same two roots, so only Kasumi and Mari, but this time they are actually written by Masada himself. These are the ones you know from the current version, so it didn't really change that much since then. Uh, and like I mentioned before, it also came with a free patch, so you could install it over the original Aldersprach Zarathustra for free. So they didn't ask you to buy the same bad game twice, uh,
Yes.
which is a good move, really. Then, uh, in the same year of 2009, about 4 months later, we had Dies Irae Acta Est Fabula come out. This one now had all the roots, so we had K and Rhea roots added. It also had a patch which you could install over the Wiederkunft version, uh, although I'm not sure it was free. But anyway, it was cheaper at least. And after that, people kinda warmed up to the series in general. Like
Yes.
they left Aldersprach Zarathustra behind, and now they enjoyed the game for what it is. Although unfortunately I'm not sure Light have really learned their lesson since then, because we had the Kickstarter project of the English translation, which didn't go as well as everyone would hope. We have some ups and downs on the manga department, because Minatogawa Sensei often goes on hiatus without any prior announcement, which raises a lot of eyebrows. And of course, Light don't ever mention it on their Twitter, or on their blog, or anywhere. And we also have the whole Pantheon thing, which fortunately seems to have gotten better since then. And we have what else? Well, basically, Light are
Well,
pretty
well,
incompetent to this day,
they're
unfortunately.
they're incompetent to this day, but it's not quite as bad as 2007.
Yeah, it's pretty
Uh,
hard to be as bad as that.
yeah, like they fumble here and there, but it's actually not quite that bad. There was also a bit of a thing when I think Ikabe came out that they needed to patch it, but they when patches happen,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
happens.
it happens with
Um,
pretty much every game out there. Like with Nitro Plus, basically always you have day one patch of some sort.
yeah, that's fine. I think the biggest fumbles are not entirely Light's fault, like not directly, like with the Asire. With the Asire, it's entirely their fault. What happened with us with Asus Zarathustra. But things like the mangaitis doesn't necessarily come from them. It can come from Minatagawa Sensei.
Well, the thing is,
Um,
we don't really know it. Like they
yeah,
are still silent about all that things, so all we can do is guess.
yes. The anime's problems came from the studio and from the fact that Masada isn't actually all that good when it comes to writing for anime, as it turns out, which is,
Oh,
it
I
happens.
suppose so. Yeah.
I think the same could also be said for other scenarios. Like Nasu is like that too. I feel like in some cases at least.
Was he
Um,
actually writing the script for the anime?
he wrote the script for Last Encore, and Last Encore has kind of received a chill reception over
Well,
things.
yeah, even among the Fate fans, it's apparently not selling well. But
Yes.
at least it was a pretty nice watch, apparently.
Yes. Well,
I
we're
still
not
have
here
to
to talk.
watch it, so I don't know.
Yeah, I have to finish it. I haven't. I have 2 episodes left, but we're not here to talk about Last Encore, of course. But the point is that being a good scenario writer for visual novels doesn't automatically make you a good scenario writer for anime, because directing an anime and writing a visual novel are, as it turns out, two very different things.
Oh, yeah.
Um, and yeah, like some of the problems come from light, some of them come from circumstances. Like you can easily pin the the Kickstarter things to the PR team and bad communication.
Yeah, it's
Um,
often the case with the Japanese studios, which just don't really know how things work in the West, so they can make pretty glaring mistakes like that.
yes, yes. There's that. There's also like miscommunication. Well, of course, that's not to say that there's no problems and there were no problems in their end, like being
Well,
unwilling to.
yeah, they still take responsibility for whatever their subordinates do.
Yeah, but you know, the point here isn't. My point wasn't that like light aren't guilty, light are okay. No, it's just that some things are problems with light, other things are problems with other circumstances that were not under in light's control. In general, Dies Irae kind of seems a bit cursed in how it
Yeah,
with
I
its
suppose.
releases. But yeah,
So, yeah, most of it comes from Eildersprach Zarathustra version. So,
yes.
we can't really discuss it at this point because neither of us actually read it, fortunately. But when we do, we might actually talk about it on this podcast. Okay, I think that's enough for this question. Okay, and we have more questions from Abdo11, who always asks some nice stuff. Thank you. And his first question is talk about Ren and Mercurius and their relationship, and their inspirations and characters and powers. And also, if you can, be kind, also talk about Ren's role and personality changes as Tenmayato. Okay, so what is the relationship between Ren and Mercurius exactly?
Mercurius is a shitty dad. No, Red is apparently Red is apparently kind of a child developed via Mercurius's shall we say magic theory. He basically collected Lotus's soul and created a what appears to be an homunculus like child. Uh, Apparently greatly gifted with Mercurius's magic and built to be an Ananerbe to control other Ananerbe. What this means effectively is that Ren has eye compatibility with any Ananerbe out there at all in
Yeah,
general.
because in the end, all of them are created by Mercurius.
Yes. It's noted even to the fact that when Shiro is trying to pillage Wilhelm's relic, Mercurius basically tells him if it was my son, you might have been able to do it, which is a very alarming statement because if Ren could actually assume control, if Ren was in Shiro's situation then where he was devoured by devoured by Wilhelm, he would have actually been able to steal the gift, the dark gift
Yeah,
from him
which
within,
says a lot.
which says a lot because, as we said in the last episode, the Dark Gift is in love with Wilhelm. So it's
This also
saying,
means that Ren basically can't lose at all, because if his soul is ever devoured by one of the LDO members, he can just assume direct control of their Anenerbe and come out on top and still keep on fighting.
yes, it's well, it actually depends if Ren would be. I think there is a situation where Ren could end, where which is if he dies and
Well, yeah,
becomes a
you have
swastika,
Machina, for
where
example.
or Machina, or if he dies and becomes a swastika. In which case he'd be stuck in the swastika until the pentachroma happens, and
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Well,
I suppose.
yeah, but yes, it's a very interesting scenario that actually the Asire, interestingly enough, very rarely goes into. But it does go into, and this kind of segues into a question that's going to come a little later in raised roots. But we'll get to that in a bit.
Yeah, yeah, for
Uh,
now, the exact relation between Ren and Mercurius.
is well, the exact relation is that Ren is basically Mercurius's proxy. He's basically not exactly his sensory, but um is kind of his. Well, it's said directly in the visual novel. He's his proxy in a way. He serves the role as his champion, as his protagonist. He's basically a human created and engineered by Mercurius to be the perfect main character who will uh, take the girl he loves and play her as an instrument to enrich his grand opera, in a way. Now, in terms of characters and powers,
So
well,
Ren's main power is basically that he can control any an energy. But besides that, he also has his own craving, of course,
yes,
which
which
is
is
not really that similar to Mercurius's craving, although you can see some similarities between them.
there is a bit of relation because Mercurius wishes to see the foreknown world end, while Ren is actually on the entirely other side of the spectrum. He actually cherishes the foreknown world.
Yes,
He wishes he enjoys foreknowledge. He enjoys repeating the same day over and over and
yes,
over again.
and it should be noted that Mercurius originally had a different craving, which should probably be more similar to Ren's.
Well, I wish to know everything.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well,
well, I guess you could.
again, we
I
don't know exactly what it was, but it's just that there has to be a reason his emanation is the way it is. It wouldn't be an endless loop if he didn't wish for it in some way.
yes, yes.
But he has reigned for so long that even he grew tired of it, and so, well, it really does feel like Ren is kind of like younger Mercurius in some way.
I don't know about that.
Well, we don't know a lot of about Mercurius, of course. It's just that there is some parallels to be drawn here.
Well, I don't know, Ferals. In my eyes, Ren is a very unique kind of existence that's not Mercurius and not even Lotus per
Yes,
se.
yes,
He's Ren is very much his own character in a way. So he's not. So like saying that he's a younger Lotus or a younger Mercurius both feels kind of off to me.
yeah, yeah, of course.
Um, but well, yeah. Now about his personality, role and personality changes is Tenmayato. Um, Ren is Tenmayato, and Tenmayato is Ren. We actually see parts. Well, the thing is, Yato is actually spends the majority of Kuchiri Kamikagura in a comatose state, or rather, not comatose might not be the right word, but in a dormant state.
Yeah, yeah.
He's not
He's not at
actually
his
awake.
full power most of the
No,
time.
he's not. He's not even. He's not in full power, and he's not even in full consciousness. There is a part where he basically wakes up when there's basically a falling out among the Yatsukahaги, among his six subordinates,
Seven.
shall we say, seven, his seven subordinates, and he basically tells them, "Okay, guys, knock it off. You don't want to start another swastika here.
Yeah,
Let's
yeah.
not fool
There are
around."
quite a lot of cute nods to Dies Irae, as
Yes.
you can tell.
So,
Well, besides the fact that it's a direct sequel, so
yes. But the point is that at that point, you can actually see he's speaking in the same tone. He references the same events. In terms of personality, he's basically Ren. The big difference is that he's a lot angrier and a lot bitter and a lot more bent on revenge. That's pretty much the big difference.
yeah, there is also the point that he has a lot of snake motives, despite the fact that he hasn't really made himself into a separate character, but still has this influence of Mercurius over him.
Yes, because it is Mari ending, and the whole thing about him washing away Mercurius's influence and being reborn as his own person is all a rare root thing,
Yes.
and doesn't happen at all in Marut. In Marut, he basically says that he doesn't care who he used to be, and it doesn't matter. And basically, Mari preserves him in the new world, despite Mercurius supposedly being removed from the world.
Yeah.
Um,
And
so there is also the possibility of him kind of possibly absorbing some remnant of Mercurius. He
well,
wouldn't be the
yeah, his subordinates do have some unenerbe powers, so you can say that he took some Ewigkeit into himself. So
well. Well, I mean, we've seen other examples of it, like Moray, who is a composite of Kay and Beatrice, and
mm-hmm.
technically speaking, which makes sense because they're both the same seat number, and if you actually think about it,
And the same
Red
voice actress.
and the same voice actress, and Red and Mercurius are also the same seat number and the same voice actor. So
Yes.
there's a possibility of Ren basically taking in some of Mercurius into him after Mercurius dies, because you actually can see in one of his forms that he has the two snakes
Yes.
coming out
Yes.
of the smoke that are Mercurius's two white snakes coming out. The same white snakes smaller versions of the white snakes he uses to fight Reinhard in Rare Root. So it's entirely possible, but this is entire. All of this is speculation. None of this is mentioned directly.
Yeah.
But yeah,
It is mentioned that he can't really bring his friends back to life in their complete state because that goes against his entire view of life. So he kind of puts them together from the parts he has, and that is why you have Morey, who is part K and part Beatrice. You have Sukuna, who is part Shiro and part Ellie, and so on. And I assume it's kind of the same way for himself as well. Like he can't be uh, completely himself, so he has to take some parts of Mercurius to at least get a fighting chance against Hajun.
yeah, perhaps
And
entirely.
also he has a bit of a uh, self-appointed villain role in this entire thing, and he has a pretty good example of it on his mind, so maybe he's just imitating his father.
No, perhaps.
I suppose I can also mention here that a lot of names of the Yatsuka Hagi, as far as I know at least, don't have a direct inspiration, but Yato's name does. And Yato no Kami were snake gods who were basically the original gods of Japan before the nation of Yamato spread across it. And their story is pretty similar to the story of Yatsuka Hagi, that they were driven away from their lands, and there was a border made between their lands and the lands of humans until it was broken and all of them were basically wiped out. And that's it for Yato, at least without going into spoilers. Next question. Is K's route ending really a bad end? And I have read somewhere that Masuda said that Ren achieved a new emanation with Scaredlo and that it was even capable of killing Merc, and is Scaredlo really useless against the Obsidian Round Table? And did Ren lose his role as Zarathustra and the Executioner?
I'll be honest. A lot about this question was actually really weird to me. I found this question really strange for two reasons. One, a lot of it is mostly because a lot of it is either mentioned in K's route quite directly, or is entirely contradicted by K's root,
Well,
like
it happens.
directly. Now is K's ending really a bad end? It's very much a perspective thing. I don't think it is. Some people feel like it is.
Some Kasumi fans, perhaps.
Yes, well, yes. Kasumi is is one of the bigger hurting points of this ending, because basically she's basically forced to break away from her friends, find someone to bear a child with, some unrelated nobody to bear a child with, so the cycle can continue. I don't think that ending is actually that bad. I do think it's actually a good ending in a way. It's actually one of the more interesting endings, and is one of the endings that some people have mentioned they actually want to see a continuation of.
Yes,
Because it
Adventure,
actually,
for example.
yes, because it actually ends in a really, really cool setting. Basically, you have Ren, Shiro, and Kei basically acting as Ananerabe hunters who are going around the world finding new swastika sites and seeking out Ananerabe to basically stop the rise of a second Obsidian Round Table, because there are basically a lot. Basically, Suahara is the ideal location, but there are other places where it's possible to do the transmutation of the gold. So yeah, it's actually a really cool kind of. It's a really cool setting in a
And
way.
we also have the best couple together, so
Yes, because Ren and Kei have arguably the best chemistry in the game. So yes, some parts of it were a little bad, and it is inconclusive compared to like Mari and Rhea, but I don't think it's a bad ending.
not as bad as the
Now,
Kasumi one.
yes, of course not. Now, basically, Ren does achieve a new emanation with Trezzo, and it's
Chorizo.
the yes, and the emanation is that he does not allow the resurrection of the dead. Now, Mercurius basically says that this emanation is the worst possible match for Reinhard because just by Ren being in. It doesn't achieve an emanation, by the way. It achieves a new craving. It doesn't
It
emanate.
was
It
Bria
doesn't.
level, I believe.
It was Brielle level, but just by him being in Glasheim, the castle was coming undone because the entire castle is built around the idea of resurrection of the dead. It's all made from the souls of the dead. So just by Ren being there and even emanating his law, even on a Brielle level, he was basically making the entire castle collapse.
Don't forget that Reinhardt himself was at Bria level at that point.
Yes, he was incomplete. Yes, well, he was at Brielle level, but even at Brielle level, he was head and shoulders above everyone else.
Well, yeah,
But
of course.
but the point is that basically a prolonged battle might have actually ended with Reinhardt's defeat because Ren's it's actually kind of a cheat what's going on there. Ren's Brielle was like, I want to beat Reinhardt, and it basically comes true.
Because Mercurius, yeah.
Yes. But yeah, what we mentioned earlier with Ren being an Ananerabe to control other Ananerabe is that Ren basically gets Beatrice's relic after Beatrice dies. Basically dies after taking out Eleanor.
Yep.
And basically her relic flies over to him after Mari sacrifices herself to protect Ren from Machina's Maki Punch. And he basically gains a new relic, and with it he achieves a new emanation, which is a new craving, which is I will not allow the dead to be resurrected, which is actually pretty fitting. It's not, as I called it, a cheat, but there's actually quite a bit of build-up to it.
Yes, of course.
There is actually a conversation that takes place earlier in the route where Ren and Shiro discuss what were they to do if someone precious to them, even if they each other were to die, how the other would react. and then basically going about how the whole concept of resurrecting the dead is blasphemous and wrong and makes no sense and completely takes away the value of the living.
And this
Um,
entire idea is also repeated in the other routes, like you have in the Rhea route, you have Ren mourning his friends, but still not wishing to resurrect them. You have, like, in the very beginning of the common route, you have Trifa asking Ren if he would want to bring back his parents back to life, and he says basically the same thing, like, no, it wouldn't be the same people, it would be zombies, and I would want that. So it's not out of nowhere.
yes. About him being able to kill Ren with it, excuse me, about Ren being able to kill Mercurius with it, I don't know anything like that. I don't recall. I don't know of Masada ever mentioning it. Maybe you're confusing and even being able to kill Reinhard with
Well,
it.
I would say that it does not contradict Mercurius's rule. So I would
Yes,
assume that
exactly.
he would not be able to kill Mercurius, because basically his entire rule is not bringing the dead back to life. It's bringing them back to the original point.
Yes.
So there is
So
no afterlife to speak of. You just
yes.
go back and live your life over and over again.
Yes. And now, did Ren lose his role as Artistra and the Executioner? The answer is yes, and this is stated directly in the ending. Basically, the ending goes like Kasumi basically convinces Mercurius to strike a Faustian deal with her, that she gains the power to save her friends, and she in turn has to do what he says, basically kind of in a way sell her soul. And she basically gets Lisa's relic and uses it to resurrect Kai and have them basically stall for time while the main characters
Right.
make their escape. And basically at that point, what Mercurius says to Ren is that at this point, he's no longer his main character. He's no longer Zarathustra. For all he cares, he can be Fuji Ren. He doesn't care about him anymore. He can leave. I basically saw this ending as Mercurius kind of saying, well, this entire situation has gone too off the rails. Most odds are what I want will never happen in this ending, so, like, I'll do what I can to appease Reinhard, like, I'll appear to be cooperative, but really I don't care about this timeline. I'll wait for time to reset again and try over.
Yeah, because he didn't actually choose Mary, so uh,
Yes.
it was all moot.
Yes. So yes, he's no longer Zarathustra, he's no longer the executioner. Basically, in a way, you could say that Mercurius got ties with him, but not really because Red still owes his existence to Mercurius. But yes.
Anyway, and the last question is actually pretty interesting one. Is Shiro's role as Ren's apoptosis just a coincidence, considering that he is Naraka's sensory? And if he ever reached emanation without being part of Ren's legion, would his power just combine with Naraka's? And would he regain his memories as Naraka?
Okay. So Shiro's role as Ren of Justice is just a coincidence. Uh, we don't know really because
There really isn't much we know about Naraka, actually.
yeah, but there isn't much we know about Naraka, but we do know that the observer in general, his role is to support and encourage a throne replacement candidate. And as far as we know, the whole apoptosis thing might very well be separate from Naraka.
Yes.
We don't know this for sure, but for all we know, it could just be like a chain reaction, or maybe kind of a god's desire to stop, to like to be removed from the throne, manifesting as a self-destructive factor. In which case, it's not directly related to Naraka. Um, the anime also added something interesting that apparently Shiro's status as Ren's apoptosis was something he acquired later on. He wasn't born this way.
Yeah, yeah.
He met Ren, and as a result, started feeling for knowledge, and so on and
Which
so
is
forth.
very similar to how everyone in the LDO uh,
Felt
started.
like after meeting Mercurius,
Yes,
yes.
yes.
The Observer is actually kind of an odd thing because we have basically two examples of observers, and
Two and a half.
kind of two and a half, yeah. But we have basically two main examples of observers, which is Judas Strife and Shiro Yusa. Now, Judas is unique in his world because he had an extremely large amount of original sin. He was basically basically second to like Ryle, to like Lot, the main character, in terms of having an amount of original sin, and Lot is mentioned as being like only second to Satanael or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
In that regard, and both of and Judas, like Satanael, was kind of born with almost an understanding that there is such a thing as original sin and that God ruined everything. And even before and after coming into contact with Satanael, he kind of accepted his role as kind of helping in the defeat of the god. But even from before that, Judas was kind of a weird character in that he was extremely apathetic. He never cared. He was always a weirdo, you could say. Um, Shiro apparently became that later on. He was like constantly plagued by foreknowledge. So I guess you could say that being the observer, and maybe that's part of the name there, kind of makes you extremely sensitive to extremely aware of the law of your world, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
And in that regard, you have an inherent desire to see that law be destroyed. Um, so yes. Now I don't know if it's a coincidence. If it is a coincidence, then it's a very interesting coincidence. But basically, the observer is always kind of related to the inheritance process.
Yes, of course.
So, considering how involved Mercurius was in it all, and how many people he ended up involving in his ploy, uh, the probability of the observer ending up being involved in it uh, is actually fairly high because
Yeah, I
as far
suppose.
mostly because it's probably because in my opinion it's probably just because Mercurius's project was so unique and so grand. Like it involved so many people. It was also unusual in the sense that gods don't actually do that. They don't orchestrate their own downfall. So yes. So I think that's it. Now,
I can only guess that basically Naraka himself operates on a much higher level, and if he actually uh, thinks that putting his sensory in the role of apoptosis would uh, be the most efficient way to promote the next god to the throne, then he can easily do that. But
yes, that's entirely possible.
yeah,
Yes.
but so basically I wouldn't call it a coincidence, but I would say that it's not correlated to each other. Like you can be an apoptosis and not an observer, and vice
Yes,
versa.
so you can be. Yes, exactly. Now, I think it might have been like a case of just Naraka's Naraka's intentions and Mercurius's intentions just coincidentally coming together.
Yeah, I
Because
suppose.
Naraka wants Mercurius off the throne because Mercurius has been on the throne too long, and Mercurius wants to get off the throne because he wants Mari to take his place. So in the end, both of them kind of wanting the same thing resulted in one character being both. Now, if he ever reached domination without being part of Ren's Legion, would his power just combine with Naraka's? I'm not sure what this question really means because we don't
I would
know what.
say that Naraka's powers go beyond emanation, so
Yes.
this doesn't really make sense to me. Like, uh, if Shiro reached emanation, that would mean that he is a candidate for the throne.
Yes.
And that would mean that Naraka, instead of actually promoting another person to the throne, can take the throne himself, which kinda contradicts his entire plan, so to say.
Yes, and if he'd have been able to do that, why did he do that before?
Yeah, basically, like, I can guess that if everything goes totally bad, like if it was like the only possible way to actually move forward, like have the next god actually change the previous one, like I don't know, if Amaterasu were ruling for too long, that I suppose he could have acted on his own, but then he would still need someone else to take the throne for him. Because he himself still has his hands full with the throne system itself. He can't be both the hardware and the software.
Yes. Now, I think the big thing is that Shiro isn't Naraka. Shiro is Shiro. He's his own
Yes,
person.
yes, of course.
And his emanation, is craving, is, as far as we know, kind of unrelated to Naraka, kind of, sort of. It's kind of his own. It's kind of his own emanation in a way. I would think it's like him accepting his role as Ren's foil, as Ren's self-destructive factor in a way. And
Yeah,
you can,
it's more related to his role as an apoptosis than his role as an observer.
yes, it's more related to his role as an apoptosis, and more related to his own specific realizations, his own specific goals. Because
Yeah,
you
yeah.
got to remember, like in Rare Root, which is the route where he has the most, where becomes arguably the strongest. Um, it's also the route where there's a big fight between him and Ren, and that fight is actually a very defining moment in their
Right,
relationship.
right.
With him basically going around and saying, I always clean up your messes. I've always, like, it's like the craziest part about Ren and Shiro killing Kasumi's father isn't that, like, both of them killed him. It's that Ren didn't kill him. It was Shiro that killed him. Shiro basically did all the basically what's he saying? I'm always doing all the work for you. How about you pick up the slack for yourself? How about you do what you know what you have to do? You know what the correct answer here is. Why do I have to be the one with the balls to do it? Why are you always such a stupid idealist? Like it's a 30-40 minute long scene. I'm not gonna obviously sit here and
It
say
was
everything.
quite an act of love.
It was quite an act of lovemaking, yes. But I feel like this entire scene kind of translates to him basically realizing and accepting and being perfectly okay in a way with him basically being Ren's kind of other, shall we say, other half, is partner. Like, you actually see it in all the other roots. I think you also see it in Kasumi, where he goes around and says when he's fighting Wilhelm is basically, why won't you die? And he says, because only he can kill me. no one else is allowed to kill him,
Yeah.
to kill me other than Ren. It's like there's a Shiro is to some extent apparently perfectly okay with being with being influenced by Ren in a way. Um, well, to an extent, he is a very individualistic person. He does the idea of like a being like an extension of someone else is probably not one uh, that that he likes. But but his relationship with Ren is basically like that. You can also kind of see it in Katuri Kamikagura, where he's basically once again willing to do all the dirty work and be the conniving bastard when nobody else is willing to, if only it means that in the end, what Ren wants to happen will happen. He basically realizes that the Yatsuka aren't going to be the ones to defeat Hajun. If they want to defeat Hajun, they're going to have to put their faith in the, shall we say, in the next generation.
Yes.
And in that regard, he's willing to like kind of go behind everyone's backs.
Yes. And
Um,
at the very least, he also has some partners in crime in that sense. Like, he's not the only one who figured that much. We
yes,
also have Michael, who, well, is not very pleased with the fact that this story actually had a sequel. We have,
yes,
most of the women are actually fine with their current state, and they would rather have Ran safe and sound, even if his current state is not really that great. But they would rather stay this way than actually fight Hajun. And
yes.
the men, most of them, are actually willing to make some risks and put their faith into these weird cells of Hajun.
I guess yes. So yes. So if you ever reach domination without being part of Ren's Legion, would this power just combine with Narcos? No. If anything, you would just like. I'm not sure if it's even possible for him to reach domination. There's okay. There's this tidbit that people need to know about the observer, but the observer is always sterile. He can't reproduce. He's impotent.
Yes. Yes.
And I think that this might also kind of might translate to the fact that he possibly can't emanate.
I can see
Maybe.
that, yeah. Especially if you
Um,
consider that Satanael's rule is also described as sterile, and the only reason he actually had a successor is because he was basically devoured from the sidelines.
yes. Now another point is that, and if you look at Judas, like Judas, kind of, despite being a very charismatic, a very powerful character within Paradise Lost, he's still like he's still not a main antagonist, despite being very, very influential. And I recently read the side stories, and in the side stories, kind of go into Judas's background a little more, and it just makes him all the more relevant. But even though he's a very relevant character and he has a lot of importance, he's not like he'll always be kind of the mid boss in a way. And I feel the same could kind of be true for Shiro. The like I said earlier, like Judas is like second to Ryle, who is like second to Stanael.
So he's third.
So he's basically like a third. Yes, he's basically like ranked third here, and it kind of I feel like that's kind of telling that this is where the
Yeah,
sensory will
it's
be.
kind of like, like Kira Yoshikage, who always took the third place because he didn't want to stand out.
Kind of, yeah, kind of like that. Um, so yes, that's like not that like Judas didn't want to stand out. It's just that was like the limit of his
Yeah,
power.
yeah, he literally can't.
That's not to say that like he was a weak character. He was very strong. He's even mentioned that like his ability to maintain his ego when still being combined with Beelzebub, which is like assumed, which is like said to be like a large mass of evil that like consumes the egos of its hosts, that he was able to retain his ego for so long is like very telling about just how strong and massive his spirit is. But still, it's like, despite being this strong, I feel like there's always kind of an upper limit that he actually can't cross. So I would think that Shiro possibly can't emanate. Um, it also kind of comes into play with like Shiro in like the in the Mitsudomo ending and the God's ending. His role is basically like I don't need shitty gods like you. So it feels like he kind of rejects the idea of godhood from the core,
Yeah, yeah.
which is kind of like his source of power as well. That's why he's so dangerous to the gods, because he's basically like the he's basically, I guess I could kind of say, he's like the normal person who's bitter at the gods and is like, yeah, I don't need you to ruin my life. I don't need you to get in the way. I don't need your stupid laws, and I don't need you
Fuck
to
a
influence
foolish
everything.
god.
Fuck a foolish god, yes. So, yeah, I think like he probably can't emanate, and I've been talking about this for way too long.
Yeah,
Would you regain his memories as Naraka? I don't think he would.
yeah.
I don't think any of the observers can reclaim their memories as Naraka, mostly because the observers are, as far as we've seen, very much their own persons, even though they're all very similar in appearance and they all have the same voice. Um, they're not the same person. It's also kind of, I feel like there might be a bit of a mix-up, but an observer is not a sensory.
Yeah, it's similar, but because Naraka himself is not a god, you can't really compare the two.
Yes, we don't know even to what extent Naraka still retains his ego. Well, like
Yeah,
the
we don't
this
know what he was and what he is right now to compare.
yes, so we don't know, but well, I don't think that he would ever regain his memories as Naraka, and I think that the fact that Shiro is a very individualistic person is very telling.
Yes, and I suppose just the fact that Naraka is too deep for the rest of the world just means that no one can reach him, even if someone does have something in common with him.
Yes.
Alright, so that's it, I guess. Uh, we barely broke over 2 hours this time, which is on the short end for us. But anyways, that means that it's time to say goodbye. We still are always happy to answer your questions. We are happy to delve deeper into any topics you have on your mind, and hopefully we will have some news to discuss next time. If nothing else, we did have Beatrice's birthday not too long ago, so we might dedicate another episode to her.
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, and until then, follow us on YouTube, follow us on Twitter, leave us all the comments you want, and keep listening to us. And until then, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye bye.